The day had begun like any other in the small town of Maplewood. The early morning light spilled through the curtains of the local coffee shop, brewed awakening, where the comforting scent of roasted beans mingled with the quiet hum of conversation. Behind the counter stood Clara, a woman in her late 30s whose gentle smile could calm even the most hurried soul. To her, every cup of coffee was more than a drink. It was a bridge, a quiet way to connect with people who sometimes didn't have the words to express what they carried inside. Among the regulars was a man named Samuel. He came every morning at precisely 8:30, always ordering the same thing, a black coffee with 1 sugar. He sat at the farthest corner of the shop, by the window overlooking the old maple tree. Samuel rarely spoke. He would nod politely, take his coffee, and spend an hour staring outside as the world passed by. Sometimes, he scribbled in a worn leather notebook, other times, he simply watched. The townspeople had grown used to his silence, and few dared to interrupt it. Clara had noticed him for months before she finally learned a little about him. Samuel was once a teacher, she'd heard, before an accident claimed his wife and left him in a silence no words could mend. The tragedy had drawn him into himself, and though he had not lost his voice, he rarely used it. Some said he hadn't spoken more than a few sentences in years. But Clara never found his silence uncomfortable. There was something sacred about it, as if his quiet carried stories that words could never hold. So, each morning, she greeted him the same way, with a soft, "Good morning, Samuel," and a smile that expected nothing in return. Winter came early that year. The mornings grew colder, and the shop's windows fogged with the warmth inside. One particularly frosty day, Samuel arrived looking more tired than usual. His shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight, his steps slower, heavier. Clara noticed immediately. When she handed him his coffee, she quietly placed a small gingerbread cookie beside it, shaped like a heart. Samuel looked at the cookie for a long moment, his brow furrowing slightly, and then, barely, he smiled. It was faint, almost hesitant, but to Clara, it felt like the sun breaking through a storm. That day, he stayed longer than usual. As the shop emptied out in the late morning lull, Clara found herself drawn to his table. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly. He looked up, surprised, but after a moment, nodded. They sat together in a comfortable quiet. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals, blanketing the street in white. Clara didn't ask him anything, didn't try to fill the silence. Instead, she sipped her coffee and let the stillness stretch between them, like two notes in a song that somehow belonged together. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if unused for too long. "My wife used to bake cookies like that," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Every winter." Clara looked at him gently. "They smell like home, don't they?" He nodded, eyes distant. "I haven't thought about that in years." It was only a few words, but to Clara, they felt monumental. It was as though the silence that had shielded him for so long had cracked, just a little, enough to let the light in. From then on, something small but beautiful began to grow between them. Samuel still came every morning, and though he remained mostly quiet, there was a new kind of peace in his stillness. Sometimes he'd leave a small note for Clara on a napkin. Simple phrases like, "Thank you for the cookie," or, "The sunrise was lovely today." She would respond in kind, writing her own notes when she refilled his cup, "It's supposed to snow again tonight," or, "Try the cinnamon blend tomorrow, it's warm and sweet." Their silent exchange became a rhythm, a conversation beyond words. The customers noticed, smiling at the way Clara's face lit up each time she found one of Samuel's notes tucked under his cup. It was as if the coffee shop itself had grown warmer, softer. One morning, a sudden snowstorm blanketed the town in thick layers of white. The roads were nearly empty, and Clara had almost decided to close early when she saw Samuel's familiar figure at the door. He was covered in snow, his scarf dusted with frost, but there was something determined in his eyes. "Samuel, you didn't have to come out in this weather," she said, worry slipping into her voice. He smiled faintly and handed her a folded piece of paper. She wiped her hands on her apron before opening it. Inside, in careful handwriting, were the words, "I didn't want the day to go by without saying thank you for remembering me." Clara looked up, her eyes stinging. "You don't need to thank me," she whispered. "You remind me every day what kindness looks like." For a moment, their gazes held, and though nothing more was said, something unspoken passed between them. Something pure, steady, and real. As winter melted into spring, Samuel began talking more. Not much, but enough for the townspeople to notice. He started greeting others in the shop, offering small smiles, even sharing stories from his teaching days. Once, he even laughed, a warm, genuine sound that caught everyone off guard. It wasn't that his grief had vanished, it was simply that it had found room beside hope. Clara's quiet kindness had made space for that. Then, one morning in April, Samuel didn't come. The clock struck 8:30, and his corner by the window remained empty. Clara tried not to worry, but as the days passed, his absence grew heavier. On the fourth day, a letter arrived at the cafe, addressed to her. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. "Dear Clara," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I've had to leave town for a while. My sister in another state hasn't been well, and she needs someone to help her through. I didn't get the chance to say goodbye, but I wanted to thank you properly, for your quiet presence, for your warmth, and for never asking me to speak before I was ready. You helped me remember what it means to feel alive again. You showed me that sometimes, love doesn't shout, it whispers through gestures, through silence, through understanding. I'll carry that with me wherever I go. With gratitude. Samuel." Clara pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She smiled through them, whispering softly to the empty shop, "You're welcome, Samuel." In the months that followed, life at Brood Awakening went on. The maple tree outside bloomed with new leaves, and the sun once again poured through the windows in golden warmth. The coffee shop remained a haven for stories, laughter, and quiet kindness, but for Clara, there was always one empty chair that held more meaning than any other. Every morning, she still prepared a cup of black coffee with one sugar and placed it by the window. Sometimes, she'd look at it and imagine Samuel sitting there, gazing at the world beyond the glass, smiling faintly the way he used to. One crisp autumn morning, nearly a year later, Clara was opening the shop when she noticed an envelope taped to the door. Her heart skipped as she saw the familiar handwriting once more. Inside was a short note and a small pressed maple leaf. "Dear Clara, I'm back in town for a few days. My sister's better now. I stopped by before sunrise, saw the light in the window, and it reminded me of the mornings we shared. I didn't want to wake you, but I left something for you by the old maple tree. With gratitude. Samuel." Clara's heart pounded as she stepped outside. Beneath the maple, where the first autumn leaves had begun to fall, she found a small wooden box. Inside it was Samuel's old notebook, the one he used to write in during those long, silent mornings. Tucked inside the front cover was another note. "I used to fill these pages with memories I wanted to forget. Now, I fill them with the moments I want to remember. This notebook belongs to both of us now, because you helped me start a new chapter." Clara closed the notebook gently, her eyes misty but bright. She whispered, "Thank you, Samuel," knowing that even if he couldn't hear her, somehow, he'd know. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara sat by the window of her coffee shop, the same spot Samuel had once occupied. The streets were quiet, the sky painted with hues of gold and violet. She opened the notebook and began to write. Kindness doesn't always speak in grand gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes, it lives in silence, in the space between two souls who simply understand. Love doesn't always need words to be heard. Sometimes, it speaks through the quiet things we do for one another. That's how Samuel taught me that even silence can sing. She smiled softly, feeling warmth fill the room. Outside, a single leaf drifted down from the maple tree, landing gently against the window. It was as if the world itself whispered back to her. And in that moment, Clara knew that love, real love, wasn't bound by words or distance. It existed in every small act of care, in every shared silence, in every heart brave enough to listen. When love spoke through silence, it didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be real. And that was enough.